The Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by Pride Seeds, Cruiser Max Vibrance, High Stick NT, and the Manitoba Pulse Growers.
Joined here on RealAgriculture.com now by Mario Tenuta, soil ecologist here at the University of Manitoba. And Mario, you've been conducting a survey for Soybean Cyst Nematode here in Manitoba for a couple of years. We know it's probably inevitable that it will show up here at some point, but so far no confirmation of SCN here in Manitoba.
That's right. We have been conducting surveys now for 2 years, and we have collected well over 3,000 soil samples from over 70 fields in Manitoba, soybean fields, and they've been negative so far for the presence of soybean cyst nematode.
So how do you go about testing in terms of places where you think you might find SCN?
So, yeah, it's a good question because we have 1.2 million acres of soybean that was grown in 2014 in Manitoba. So we obviously cannot sample every field, right? So we have to strategize and prioritize which fields to sample. So what we do is we choose the fields that have had soybean growing for the longest time. It's a number of years that soybean has been grown on. Why? Because that's more chance of finding the nematode in higher populations to establish. Fields that are closer to the United States where the nematode is present, so we're talking around the Emerson area, on the Red River valleys, we get close to North Dakota and Minnesota. And fields that have had a history with edible beans, because edible beans can be a alternate host, so where we're growing things such as pintos, cranberries, Great Northerns. Those are fields that we like that are now growing soybean as well that we like to we have sampled.
CFIA recently deregulated SCN, and I guess this is an example of where regulations haven't been successful in keeping a pest out of our country.
Yes, that's true. So soybean cyst nematode had been regulated for decades in Canada, primarily as a means to keep it in check and out of Ontario, where there was quite a long history of soybean production, and it was surrounded by soybean cyst nematode areas such as in Michigan, Ohio, and New York State. Unfortunately, the regulation of SCN didn't work to keep it out of Ontario, and and it's also recently been found in Quebec as well. So it's progressed throughout southern Ontario and now into Quebec where soybean is grown. And the United States hasn't regulated SCN for decades now. So CFAA decided that it actually was complicating things to have SCN regulated in Canada, present in most of southern Ontario where soybeans are grown, and it's not regulated in the United States. That's actually a recipe for complication. Because if it was found in Manitoba, for example, then that means we wouldn't be able to move commodities that could have soil residues on them to the United States, even though the United States would accept them just fine, but by Canadian law, we wouldn't be able to do that. So it's been deregulated. So the main impact of deregulation, though, to our growers is that CFAA will not survey for the pest in Manitoba or anywhere in Canada. So it's basically up to us. It's up to the growers to survey, and that's what we're doing now is we are conducting the surveys to see if this nematode is in Manitoba.
When it comes to preventing the spread of SCN, this is probably a reminder for people in Ontario more than something new. People who have been listening to your brother for many years. A lot of it comes down to minimizing soil movement between fields if we want to keep it out of our own field.
That's right. So movement of soil with implements, tractors, wheels, even boots, and birds are probably the likely mechanism of how it's getting around. It could be some wind in terms of blowing the cysts up in the air to to different fields. But I think primarily it's going to be the soil that is adhered to implements and tires. So a key thing is to wash. And I think for soybean cyst nematode, a good power washing to remove the soil is key. I don't think sterilizing with a disinfectant would work very well. Actually, I think power washing is the best thing. And keep the trucks off of fields, and just keep your boots clean.
Overall, though, I guess it's something that growers need to prepare for, and I guess resistant varieties or tolerant varieties are something that we need to think about in the future here in Manitoba.
For sure. So there are resistant varieties. So these are soybean varieties lines that have genetics in them to tolerate the presence of the soybean cyst nematode on the roots. So the nematode will still infect the roots, but not to the same extent as the non-resistant lines. Okay, so they're part of the toolbox. So resistant varieties together with maintaining longer rotations. So don't have tight soybean rotations. Don't do soybean after soybean or 1 and 2 soybeans. So 1 and 3, 1 and 4 is recommended. Using resistant lines that would really prevent the buildup of the nematode in fields.
And once it's here probably forever.
That's a big problem with this nematode because of the cysts, the eggs of the nematode that are jammed into the cyst can survive for years and decades. So they're geared, they've evolved to survive in soil. And there was one other thing too in terms of helping survive, so is weeds. So there are many weeds are alternate hosts for the nematode. So even without the soybean growing, you can still have the survival, or at least the low maintenance of a population because of weeds. So weed control is also extremely important.
And then finally, Mario, some farmers have been sending soil samples to labs in the U.S. and they've been coming back as testing positive for SCN. Is that something does that mean we have SCN here in Manitoba even though your survey hasn't found it, or can you explain why there might be a positive result in those lab results?
Well, yeah, that's a very good question because at the moment there's a bit of a difference between commercial lab analyses and research analyses that we would do in terms of identification of the nematode. So what we do in the laboratory is extremely precise in naming the nematode in terms of exactly what kind of a cyst nematode it is. Commercial labs are more, they're better at identifying population levels. So once you know you have soybean cyst nematode, you can do commercial tests to figure out what the level is and so forth. But to establish what the nematode is in terms of its kind of cyst nematode is really important. So there are other cyst nematodes present in our soils. We've found them, but they're not soybean cyst nematodes. They're natural or native cyst nematodes, and they cause no problem for or potential problem for our crops at all. So what I recommend to growers is to contact me at the University of Manitoba to provide us soil samples, or we're conducting surveys to allow us to get onto their fields to sample, included in the survey, and we will verify and do analysis that would be extremely precise.
So it's more about once you know you have it, then those commercial tests are better for saying how much of it you have.
Yes. Yes, so if you're managing high population levels and you're trying to manage it with rotations, resistant varieties, and so forth, the commercial labs are very good at that because they'll extract the soil, they'll look for a nematode that looks like soybean cyst nematode, and they can only assume that it is soybean cyst nematode. Whereas we would pick up individual nematodes and identify individual nematodes, the species, and that way we're very precise in knowing what it is.
Well, thank you for coming.
You're welcome.